The first thing that I want you to know is that you're in the exact right place, and this is the exact right conversation. Children they're amazing humans. Dr. Montessori tells us about their potential, and the truth is there's so much going on in their brains, and they require every single part of us. And I think, as we're designed as human beings on the planet, I think children actually are the gift that bring us humility and ensure that we stay humble and that we stay really connected to our own humanity. And I feel, and so that's what I try to remember as a parent as we're going through. So thank you for being here. I want to give credit where credit is due. I need to share with you that a lot of the workshop today comes from the No Drama Discipline book by Daniel Seigel. I highly, highly recommend this book. If you can get it as a book on tape, you can listen to it while you're cleaning the dishes or going for a walk or whatever, but really has so much good information, and I'm taking as much as I can and giving it to you all, but it really is valuable. Our workshop today looks like we're going to talk about what is discipline, and then the reactive versus the responsive brain. Then we'll talk about secure attachment versus disorganized attachment. Then the key questions to ask to your child: why, what, and how. We'll take a break. What you can do as a parent, redirection strategies, take another quick break, and then summarize and do questions at the end. That being said, if you have questions that come up, you're welcome to put them in the chat. Okay, so as parents, we always want to begin with the end in mind. Okay, and so I want you all, this is what we want to do. We want to think, okay, what we know now is that the child's brain is not fully formed until really their reasoning brain, and this is straight out of Daniel Siegel's work, is really formed at about the age of 25. Turns out the emotional part of the brain, the emotional center of the brain, now they're realizing it is not fully formed till they are 32 years old. Which is right, brand new information. I just saw Dina take a deep sigh. That's a long time, right? And so what are the 5 attributes that you want your child to have as an adult? And if you can put those in the chat for me, at least a couple of them, and I'll read them out, that would be great. What are the things that you all want to make sure that your child has? Okay, I see empathy. Margaret says empathy. Dominique says kindness. We definitely want them to have empathy and kindness. That dictates the quality of our own relationships. Integrity, compassion, grace and courtesy, curiosity. Oh my gosh, Corinne, is that French? Joie de vivir. I took Spanish. I don't know. Maybe the joy of life, I'm going to guess. Confidence and compassion, says Deanna. Corinne says the joy of living. Oh, the joy of living. There we go. Great. And then coping strategies from Margaret. And Jay says the stoic sensibility. Shay, isn't that just like you? Don't you have a stoic sensibility?
I just, yeah, that's my little contribution to making sense of the world.
Deanna says a strong sense of self. Emily, confidence, humility, and patience. Okay, beautiful. So that, as we're parenting, right? If we can keep in mind where we are going, it is so helpful, because otherwise what ends up happening is we think that we start reacting, and we'll get into that. But where are we going? Who do we want them to be? We always want to be driven by that instead of looking just at the short term. If we're just looking at the short term, it's really easy to go to domination, right? It's easy to go to top down. And the truth is, those things that we just talked about building do not come out of a child being dominated and going to a sense of fear or disconnection, right? All of those come out of us modeling them and demonstrating how they're built. And that's where they learn those things. We can't tell them to have them. We have to show them how to have them. Okay. So where does the word discipline come from? Well, this is really interesting. The Middle English version, which I think oftentimes is where what we think about when we come to discipline, is mortification by scrounging oneself. And I had to look up scrounging. Scrounging is actually like just tearing yourself apart, right? And I will say that growing up, my parents' version of discipline, and they weren't, physically abusive, but it was when you were in trouble, you should be scrounging yourself, and I think that's oftentimes the version of what discipline is. Yet the Old French from Latin is instruction and knowledge. And that's really what Montessori sees. We see discipline as education. So anytime we're seeing a struggle, we're saying, what's the need? What's the lagging skill? What do we need to teach here? Which is why so often there's this difference in how the children show up from school to home, right? Because the other piece I just want you to remember, and they talk about this in hand, which I highly recommend. The thing they talk about in hand is children also keep it together all day long, and then they come home and they do need to have the ability to let out the air. They have to have the ability to let out those emotions and all of those pieces, and we have to be able to hold that. Okay, so what does discipline mean to you? I'm going to ask you to talk about how you were disciplined growing up. And how did you feel about yourself while you were being disciplined, and what your goals for discipline for your child are? Okay, any questions about that? Anyone have anything that they'd like to share? Anything that came up during our session before we keep moving? Particularly around what your goals are for discipline for your child?
Tamara, in my group, we were talking about the use of consequences, and how in our Montessori training, we're trained, not to use external rewards and punishments for behavior, but how you also instill that sense that there are boundaries that you can't cross, and how do you get that point across? Could use some help with that.
I love, that's beautiful. And I want to speak about that a little bit, Margaret, because I don't actually have a slide on that. I think that's important. In Montessori, we teach children to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, right? And it's not because they're going to get something or they're going to have a consequence if they don't. And obviously in life, there are natural consequences. So we also don't step in the way of them not having natural consequences. So my daughter's 11. If she doesn't pack her lunch, she doesn't have a lunch, right? That's a natural consequence. That's not me coming in top down saying, you're not going to have a lunch, young lady, right? It is a natural consequence that falls out the bottom. And so what we really try to do is set up life so that there are natural consequences, and that's built into the fabric, but it's not this punitive approach, because and we'll talk about timeout. We're going to talk about some of those pieces, but thank you, Margaret. That's really great. Okay. So, all right. Well, Corinne says, so many of our hopes have to do with resisting defaulting to the ways we ourselves were disciplined as children. Yeah, Deanna said something really beautiful. We're in this together with our children. That's exactly right. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful. Okay. Anyone else? Anyone else want to add anything before we move on? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. All right, so the 4 goals of discipline, as we see them, and this is straight out of Dan Siegel's work again, and Tina Payne Bryson, I should also give her credit, are really changing the behavior, right? We want to see the behavior that we are not liking or not doesn't work, changing, building the brain, building skills, and developing self-discipline. And I think oftentimes as parents, we get really focused on the first one of changing the behavior, but we're not necessarily focused on building the brain, building the skills, and developing self-discipline, which are really the pieces that serve the child incrementally for their lifetime. So as parents, we really need to ask ourselves what brain we're working with. And so what we know now about the brain is really there are 2 different parts of our brain that become engaged. And there's a receptive part of the brain and there's a reactive part of the brain. And when the reactive part of the brain it comes up is when we're triggered, right? So I'm learning about polyvagal theory, and that means we're in the sympathetic part of our nervous system is engaged, right? And that means we're in fight, flight, or freeze, right? And one of the things we do is we bring that into our work with our children. So what's interesting is our system is designed to turn on into sympathetic when we don't feel like we're safe, or when we feel like we're triggered, or when we're challenged. We go into the response mechanism that our brain built to keep us safe from saber-toothed tigers, right? Then we bring that response of the saber-toothed tiger coming at us to this human that's this big, and we have to navigate all of that emotion and all of that reactivity. And sometimes it's not that big, right? Sometimes it's smaller and we can manage it more. But anytime we're triggered, we are no longer in what's called the ventral vagal part of the nervous system, where we are holding the spaces all as well. We are automatically, when you are triggered, you go into sympathetic, which brings up your own fight, flight, or freeze, which is exactly what the children also have, right, going on, right? So what we have to do is look at our own brain and really recognize if we're in reaction, that is not the time to have the conversation. Now, if your child's about to run across the street, obviously you need to go to reaction, right? Like your child's stepping into danger, but oftentimes what we're reacting to is not an immediate threat. We're reacting to something that's triggering us. So we have to be responsible for understanding both the reactive and the responsive brain, both for ourselves and our own children, okay? So one of the things we know is that yelling, timeouts, and spanking, all of those put the child immediately into stress response, okay? And what happens in the brain is the cortisol is released in the brain, and they cannot learn, they cannot take in new information for 20 minutes after the cortisol is released. So anytime we go to yelling, anytime we go to timeout, anytime we go to spanking, the they're triggered, and there's no way for their brain to be receptive any longer. Okay. And so what we know about the 2 different states, and I want to talk a little bit more about this, is that when we have the reactive brain, there is an automatic response, right? We can't control it. So our job as parents is to have short-term and long-term structures for moving ourselves from reactive into responsiveness. So we have to do the work of knowing ourselves and knowing what can move us when we go to reaction and move us into being responsive. Because when we're responsive, we can make conscious decisions about based on the principles and values that we really hold dear and that we've agreed upon with our children and our significant other or anyone else. When we're in reaction, we lose our connection with the child and we lose the ability to really support their growth, right? So what are some short-term structures for responsiveness that you know about yourself, and you can put these in the chat, that help you move from reactive to being able to be responsive? I had one teacher when we were teaching this, she says that she taps right here on her, like on her third eye, and just the process of that actually somehow it soothes her and engages her brain differently, and she no longer is in that kind of triggered state. What else? What are some of the things that you all use? Margaret says she closes her eyes and takes a deep breath, and then she takes a quick mini break, which is very wise, right? She steps away, right? Che says he takes 1, 2, 3, breathe with me. It sounds like, Che, you're doing that with your child, with Lila. That's really good. Pedro goes for a walk. Che does that with her. That's great. I love having you both do that together. That's really nice idea, and it's great role modeling, because the truth is our children are not just going to be triggered by us in their lives, just like we're not just triggered by our children. We're, our stuff, let's be clear, if we weren't already carrying anger or frustration or whatever it is, it couldn't come up with our children. It's not that they're the only ones who bring this up for us, right? That's our stuff that we're carrying from when we were, probably from when we were children, and we're bringing it right along. So, okay. And then we also have to have long-term structures for responsiveness. So we know what those are. They're meditation, they're exercise. There's also something called an empathy buddy, which hand in hand promotes, which is this opportunity to have somebody to just say all your stuff to once a week, and the person just holds a safe space. I highly recommend that as well. And it cannot be a significant other. It can't be your best friend. It needs to be somebody who you can really let all of your stuff out with. So, and a piece of this is teaching your children, because when you step away and you say, I'm triggered right now, I'm going to take a moment, you're teaching them how to understand themselves and say, I'm triggered right now, I need a moment, and how to transition into their responsive brain. Because every human being gets triggered, every single one of us. It's what do we do with it? How do we respond is really what defines us oftentimes with our children, and what kind of parent we're going to be. So there are any comments or questions on that before we keep moving? Okay, so there are 4 S's of secure attachment. This is straight out of Daniel Siegel's work. And so according to Daniel Siegel, for a child to feel secure, which is actually the critical foundation for brain development, for their emotional development, for their social skills, all of that comes out of their own security. For a child to have that experience, they must feel safe, soothed, and seen. Now, notice it doesn't say you have to let them run the house, you have to let them be disrespectful, like all of that is not built in here. And so I really want to be clear that some people interpret this as there has to be kind of the child is, able to bring behaviors that don't work for the team and the family. That's not what we're saying. We're saying that, but the child must feel safe, soothed, and seen in order to feel secure. Okay. And when a parent loses their temper, it goes into a reactive brain, they are inflicting fear or pain And what happens, well, I have a slide on that, so we'll go into that. Okay, so when we give a child a timeout, I love this slide. We think they're going to go in and they're going to sit by themselves and they're going to think, oh, I really messed up. I feel so guilty. I'm going to do better. But what happens is, and what Payne Bryson talks about is, as soon as we go to punishment, their guilt turns from guilt, and they do have natural guilt when they've done something that doesn't work, just like we do, right? They have natural guilt. But what happens when somebody makes us wrong about what we've done? We stop feeling guilty and we start blaming the other person, right? And all of a sudden, that self-reflection that we're doing on ourselves stops, okay? Margaret says, her daughter says, worst parents ever, right? And so we have to really pay attention, because as soon as we make the child wrong, they lose their natural guilt, which means they're no longer self-reflecting on the behavior that didn't work. They're just thinking about how to get even with us or how awful we are, right? And the other thing we need to be aware of, and I did not realize this, I wish I'd known this when my children were really young, but there's something called disorganized attachment, okay, that happens in the brain. When the person who is disciplining, or it's not really disciplining, when they're coming at you and you have fear, or you have severe anxiety around your parent, but your parent is the person that you're supposed to go to when you have those feelings. You're literally biologically wired to go to the parent when you have those feelings. And when the person who's inflicting those feelings is the same person who you're having this experience with, the brain sends you to the parent, but you can't go there. And it's called disorganized attachment. It's actually really damaging for the brain, and it truncates an incredible amount of their emotional development when that piece is closed for them. Okay. So that's, anyway, so don't want to spend too long on that. So what brain, the other thing is what brain is your child working with? Are they in a reactive brain or responsive brain? Because if they're in a reactive brain, they cannot learn a lesson from a reactive brain, right? They can only learn a lesson when they're in the responsive brain. They can stay in responsive brain when they've done something that didn't work, if we approach it from a place of partnership and work with them. I find that it's really helpful to think about misbehavior. What we call misbehavior is dysregulation. So oftentimes we'll say at Montessori, a child's dysregulated, which means they don't have, their brain is operating in a way that they don't actually have the skills to be successful in that moment in a way that works for the community. Okay, so we're asking that we all rethink discipline. And part of this is knowing that children do well if they can. There's a big distinction between children do well if they can and children do well if they want to. If it's that the child does well if they want to, then our job is to make them want to. And by golly, I will make you want to do this, right? Like, we can come in like that. We have the power. We're bigger, we're louder, we're stronger, we're wiser, kind of, sometimes. And so I think that the piece to remember is that if we know it's children do well if they can, then we go to stopping the blame and we get curious, and we start to bring curiosity to the conversation and wonder what's going on for this child that they're dysregulated at this time. Any comments, thoughts before we keep moving? These pictures should be, this is Lila. This is Margaret and Chay's daughter when she was little. Oh, here, Chase said, general thought. I feel when our daughter acts up, it's because she clearly thinks it's working for her. She's getting something out of it. My goal is that she comes to realize it's not achieving the desired result. How do we operationalize this? What a great question, Che. Listen, let's go through today and see if you have an answer to that. And if you feel like you don't, I'll dig into it with you. How about that? We'll explore. I've never had it posed quite that way. So I love that. Children testing boundaries and their sensorial experimentation. I know, like for you, Dina, this is, your child's beyond this, but it's an important part of their development. And I remember Margaret sending these photos and saying it really wasn't a very long time frame that these all happened. This is all, like she's in her dad's shaving cream, she's taking out all but it's part of their development. So part of it is remembering that they're not trying to do something that's not respectful or not working. They're just exploring, they're trying on new things, right? So our job is to rethink discipline. So our 3 questions to ask when a child is not behaving are why, what, and how. Okay, so why is the child acting this way? Now, I love this. You have the dad who, and this is more your age, Dina, is you have the child who doesn't want to do their homework, and we want to go in to give a lecture, right? Like, well, if you had started earlier and blah, 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 and this whole thing, right? And that actually, what that does is shut down their brain. Anytime we go in with the lecture, and I want you to know, I had 2 Montessori credentials before I started really digging into this work. I was a great lecture giver. I could give they would do, and I would do it gently and kindly, but you know what? They weren't listening because I wasn't turning their brain on. I was shutting their brain down and I was doing the thinking for them. What we're wanting to do is engage their brain in the conversation and in the solution. So you're asking, why is she having a hard time right now? And you want to say, why is she having a hard time right now? What do I want to teach and how do I best teach it? The way we do that is we have to come in with curiosity rather than assumptions. We think we know, right? We have to look deeper into see what may be behind the behavior. And then we have to assess whether the behavior was developmentally appropriate. Like in the Lila pictures before, it's actually developmentally appropriate for her to do those things. We may not like them, but it is developmentally appropriate. Okay, so it's shifting our way of thinking for curiosity, empathy, and really looking deeper. We also, we need to, so the what do I want to get out of this moment, right? And I love this. Instead of, go over here, what can you do? Like child just did something. What can you do to make it right? You have to be in that in that responsive brain, and then you're bringing them into the conversation. And what lesson do you want to teach in the moment? Remember that the goal of discipline is not about consequences. It's not about having them get in trouble. You're looking to long-term form the brain. So they're going to make mistakes in their life, right? We know we all make mistakes. What do we do when we make a mistake? Do we try to hide it from our boss? Or do we own it and say, I made a mistake, right? That comes out of this moment with your child. Are we friendly with error? Is it okay they made a mistake? And then what are we going to do? We're going to own it and we're going to figure out how to solve it. And they have to be a part of that conversation, not us deciding what they're going to do, right? So this morning, my daughter, my oldest daughter is 16. She has a life coach, and this works all the way through, just so you know. And she missed her appointment with her life coach yesterday. So, I wanted to wake up and say, I still want to do all that, right? And I really thought, okay, so what's my best approach here? And what's the lesson here? So I said, how do you want to handle this? And she said, I need, I'm going to call her and I'm going to apologize. And I said, oh gosh, I wonder what she felt like when you didn't come on the call. And she said, I think she probably felt like I was blowing her off and it wasn't important. And when she, rather than me, and this is literally, I wish I taped it, but literally rather than me coming in and lecturing her, asking those questions and really getting clear on what lesson did I want her to learn from that and seeing it, I think this is the biggest piece. If we can see these moments and this is what Dan Siegel says, you see these, rather than thinking life is about these big going to Disneyland or these moments, life is about these beautiful breakdowns where we have the opportunity to teach these skills. And these are the moments of beauty. These are the moments that define the child. It's not the big trips. It's how do we help shape their thinking and their thoughts and their responses as they're moving through life. And so that's what I try to keep in mind, is it's, again, playing the long game. Yes, it would have actually kind of felt good to be able to lecture Sia this morning, because, you know, I had reminded her a couple days ago and asked her how she was going to remind herself and all of that. And she didn't do any of those pieces. And I could have said, I told you so. It would have felt really kind of good for a minute. And then she would have been left blaming me, frustrated with me, and not actually thinking about how she was going to solve the problem or how she was going to repair that relationship, right? It's always playing the long game. We also want to think about what life skills may need strengthening for these people, right? The truth is, do they need to build more self-control? How are we going to support them with that? How are we going to support them in taking responsibilities for their actions? How are we going to support them in building appropriate ways to express big emotions? We're going to talk about big emotions in a little bit, but they need the opportunity to be held even during the challenging behavior. It's not about that moment. It's about the long-term skill, right? Any questions, comments, thoughts about that before I move on? I'm supposed to wait 6 seconds when I ask that question.
That sounds like you're introducing this, what do they call it? The Socratic method into your discipline, getting them to arrive.
Yes, it is, right? I love that, Che. I never thought of it that way, but it really is having them participate in that way is significant like that.
And Tamara, how do you handle disrespect? This is sort of new in our house, but like the, disrespectful tone or calling us a name, and it's not like a mistake they can own. She did it on purpose. Need help with how to react in that situation.
Personally, so I think there are a lot of different approaches, but I go back to Montessori 101 with that. And I say, I don't like it when you talk to me like that. Right? It's just, or I don't like it when you call me a name. Right? And I think the key is for when we go big, right, and say, you can't, and I want you to know, I am not a perfect parent. My husband's not a perfect parent. We are in this lifelong journey. And just this weekend, my oldest daughter said something that I started giving her a lecture, and my husband put his hand on my shoulder, and I was like, no, I'm going to and I wanted to give that lecture, right? That was about me and how I felt. And I did not approach that looking for the why or the what or any of it. I went to being triggered and making her wrong, right? Which did not teach the lesson, because then she shut down the relationship. We disconnected the relationship, and she was glad then she said what she said, because then I made her wrong. When I say, I don't like it when you talk to me like that. I really try not to talk to you like that. And that usually for my girls, but it's taken, there are different ages. They go, oh, I'm sorry. It kind of shifts the moment.
That's interesting. That's my gut instinct, and it often does not result in an apology, but I wonder if maybe it allows us to then go to what the deeper issue is. Like, I don't want to ignore the disrespect either. So I like the idea of saying, I don't like that, but then maybe moving on to address whatever's behind the.
Well, and one of the things that Dan Siegel talks about a lot, and I really appreciate this, is that you, in the moment, you say, I don't like it when you talk to me like that. And then you do not deal with it right then, because her brain is in reactive mode right then, right? Just like my daughter's brain was in reactive mode. an hour later, I was able to say, I am so sorry. I was not respectful. And she said, I wasn't respectful either. And we can say, then I could say to her, what's going on with you? Right. Let's talk about, I noticed that you've been short lately. And she's but the conversation looks different by age, but the idea is the same of, you set the limit right then, right? This is a limit. I don't like that. Right. And then later you dig into the behavior with her. And that's what I try to do, is not do it in the heat of the moment.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Margaret. Okay. Any other questions, thoughts? Okay. All right. And then how can I best teach my child this lesson? And you're going to want to think about the development, the age and the developmental stage and the context of the situation. It's often easy to respond like a consequence is going to solve the problem, and they really generally don't work. They're short-term solutions. They're not long-term solutions. And it breaks the connection. You want to think about both your own and your child's emotional state. Is she capable of learning right now? Are you capable of teaching right now? Right? If you're not capable of teaching with grace, it's not the time for the lesson. But you can give a lesson, and this is part of what we do in Montessori, is we're not going to try to give a child a lesson on how to be respectful when they're in the middle of a meltdown. We're going to wait and talk to them later, support them, get them through the moment, and then later you can even say, I see that when you're upset, you're pushing your friends. Let's talk about some other ways. What are other ways that you could show you're upset without hurting other people, right? And so you go into this other part of the conversation. Okay. So I'm going to ask you all to take a few minutes for yourself and think about a behavior that's happening at home, something that triggers you, right? Unless you're a perfect parent, you never get triggered. And think about, let's take 3 minutes and why is the child behaving that way? What's the lesson the child needs? And how is the best way to teach that lesson? And just take a moment to go through and think that through right now while it's fresh.
So how do you deal with kind of non-behaviors? So my daughter's not at the age where we're having like behavior issues, like she's actually doing something wrong or being wrong, sometimes a little snarky attitude here and there. But, how about like when they're not doing something, like you need them to get ready to go out the door. Like for us, it seems like mornings are a really hard time, or getting ready to go somewhere is a really hard time. Or like I've asked you to pick up the towels in the bathroom 5 times now, very kindly. Can you please take care of that or put your clothes away? Like, how do you deal with non-behaviors?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that. Part of what we try to do is we try to have a family meeting. And that's one of the things that I read a book years ago called Duct Tape Parenting. And when I did that, I realized how much of my life with my children, I was being directive, right? The towels need to be picked up. Your room is not clean, And what she talked about in that book, which I found to be really impactful, is I didn't want that to just be the things that I was saying to them, right? It was so easy for that to take over. And she really recommends a family meeting so that you have the opportunity to sit with your child and pick a couple things over the course of the week that they're going to work on. So the expectation is not perfection. Maybe the expectation you have, and you get to bring the family meeting. We have a session recorded on that for elementary students, just so you know. It's called Empowering Your Elementary Student, but goes over family meetings in depth. And I would say really about the age of 4, wouldn't you say, Margaret, about 4 family meetings start becoming a good practice? In family meetings, you do acknowledgement, so everybody acknowledges everybody else. Then you bring issues, right? So that you bring your issues, she brings her issues to the family meeting. you problem solve together. It's not a blame thing. It's really, you know, everybody's on the team of trying to figure out how to support everyone else. You make agreements for the week. This is all recorded, right? You have it written down. And you make agreements, and then and you review the agreements from the week before, you see how you did. And then at the end, at least in our house, we do allowance. And allowance is not attached to chores, because then the children say the chores don't need to be done and the chores do need to be done, right? Like that's a part of being a contribution. So I really recommend putting those pieces there and then asking her what pieces she would like to take on that week. And that way you're able to say, wow, you had your towels picked up 4 times this week. I noticed that the towels were up 4 times this week. It was so different for me to walk into the bathroom. I really appreciated that. And so because what they talk about there is your job is to raise a grown-up, right? So you have skills she needs to have by the time she gets to turn really 18, right? She goes out on her own. And so we want to be building towards that, but they're not going to do it all at once. Does that help?
It does. And it makes sense. And like recently we had a conversation just like last week or the week before. So I feel so busy. I have so much to do. And, you know, I wish, you know, I had more time, because she was saying like, we don't have time to do fun stuff. And I'm like, I would really love to do more fun stuff, but I feel like I'm so busy and I have so much to do. And if you could help me do some of the things, then that would be really nice. And then we'd have more time to play together. Mm-hmm. And so she has emptied the dishwasher or found little things to do or put things away. And I've recognized that and said, oh, it was so nice to have the dishes all put away and I didn't have to do them. Like now we can go outside, and do you want to go for a walk? Do you want to swing on the swings? So I've noticed that, and that is really helpful. So I think we're going to do more of that. And I was curious about and I hope I'm not taking up too much time here.
No, you're doing great.
Question, but I'm curious about the allowance. So it's not tied to the chores, because she has shown interest in receiving an allowance, but I didn't want to tie it to chores because I heard that wasn't what you were supposed to do. So how do you set the allowance and like
tie it to family meetings? But I also, with having an allowance, there come responsibilities of what they pay for, right? So all gifts that they want to purchase for other people come out of that. I have a certain amount I'll pay for, let's say, a pair of rain boots. If they want something fancier, it comes out of their amount. You know, like if they want to, when we go to Target and they want something, we have an agreement. It can't be sweets. We don't do that. But it's not. But other than that, if they want things that they can. I mean, my Georgie blew $60 on a doll that peed, and she played with it twice. And I tell you that's a whole nother class, but I was like biting my tongue. My husband's like, you're letting her spend. I'm like, honey, it is her money. How else is she going to learn? Right. And she, 2 days later, about a week later, as it's sitting there, she goes, well, that was not a good investment. I was like, yeah, right. So it gives, now that was her birthday money, and that was not allowance money, or would have been a lot of it, but that's a piece that I recommend. The other thing I would change if you're open to the coaching, Dina, is it's not helping you. It's actually the responsibility of the house is on everyone in the home, right? And part of what we do is we take it on like it's our responsibility. And the truth is, that she's old enough that actually the responsibility is the families that these things are done. And the way that we approach it is, what do you want to take on? So what are the jobs you would like to take on? What do you want to own? Here's what I'm going to own. And that helps a lot. Like Georgie's always responsible for emptying the dishwasher and taking out the garbage and taking out the recycle and getting all the garbages out of the house. And then one of the things we do is Saturday mornings, we have family clean, and everybody cleans. Like it's just, we all clean until the house is at a place where we're, so just, that's the one piece, and I'm working on that too. It's really easy to do. I need you to help me. No, actually, this needs to be done. Which piece of it would you like to take on?
Okay, thank
Right.
you.
Yeah, great. Che, you had something. Oh, maybe he got up to get a cup of coffee. Okay, all right. So here, let me go back to sharing the screen here. And all right, so what can you do as a parent? I love this slide because it really simplifies. This is straight from Tina Payne Bryson's work. Discipline's about teaching. Teaching requires our children to be receptive to learning. Receptivity results from connection, and connection moves kids from reactivity to receptivity. So when children are throwing a fit is when they need us most. And it's what's beautiful about in hand. That was the first time I really understood that. I used to isolate my children when they were upset. And I have to tell you, as an adult, what really became clear to me is if I came home and I was upset and my husband said, well, you're upset, so you should go to your room for a little while, I would be like, are you kidding me? Right? But yet that's so often what we do to children is we isolate them when they're emotional or they have big emotional needs. And that's the time that they really need us the most. And so our job is to really connect with them and give them a safe place to have those emotions and to be heard and to be seen and to be soothed as they're navigating. Really, and here's the other piece. I really think this is important. If, like last weekend when I shared with you that I lost my temper, I didn't yell, but I scolded pretty significantly. And it's the same thing. And it wasn't about that moment. It was about being stressed out from work. It was about COVID. It was about my own emotional well-being. Let's be clear that for me was a buildup, and then that was the breaking point. It's the same thing with children. When they melt down because they don't have the red cup, or they're frustrated because, they don't get to have their show. It's not about that thing at that moment. That is a buildup. We don't know what it's about really because they don't have the skills, and most adults don't have the skills to put all of that together either. So we want to really hold them. And in our family, when we took hand in hand, we finally learned that when somebody's having a breakdown or somebody's upset, that's when we bring them in closer and we love on them more. Right? And we say, gosh, you're really having a hard time. Let's bring you in closer. That soothes the system, and then they're able to articulate what's really going on. I remember doing that I just want you to know that we really live this. My youngest, this was 5, 6, 7 years ago, quite a while now. My youngest Georgie it's her job to empty the dishwasher, and she didn't want to empty the dishwasher. And so we have a limit that's the job, and the dishwasher needs to be emptied so everybody else can do their jobs. And she was throwing the colossal fit. I mean, I don't want to do the dishwasher. You can't make me. I'm not going to do it. And I was really in a responsive brain. I was able to be with her upset and her emotion and hold that love for her and just be with her and stay with her and stay connected. And my husband came by. I mean, she started saying, "You're a monster mother. You're the worst mother in the world." But I knew that wasn't really her. She wasn't trying, it was all of this crap coming out. So we call it staring into the leaf blower, right, in our house. And my husband came by and said, "Do you need me to tag you out?" And I was like, "Nope, I got this. I'm okay." And so she's going, and she gets to the end and it's all out. And then she says to me, she says, "Thanks for hanging in there with me, Mom." Right? She got up, she went and emptied the dishwasher, and then she came back and she started talking to me about a situation at school that really was making her feel upset. right? It wasn't about the dishwasher, but if I had gone in there and yelled and said, you can't, and stuffed all that emotion would have never come up, and she would have never had the ability then to get down to her own feelings, because that was masking it, right? Like all that had to come up and out in order for her then to be able to say, and I just want you to know I'm really struggling at school with XYZ, and it kind of all came pouring out. But we had to have that connection be intact, and I had to have a responsive brain to be able to hold that space for her. Okay. So what can you do as a parent? Provide clear, consistent expectations and schedules. Okay. The consistency really makes a big difference. Children, it makes them feel safe and like they can trust. It's part of why Montessori classrooms work so well, because the expectations are clear, they're defined, they're not questioning what's expected of them, and it's the same, and we hold the same standards. Okay. And I really want to read, to let the child do as he likes when he's not yet developed any powers of control is to betray the idea of freedom. So we have to, what Dr. Montessori says, we have to be able to be their discipline when they don't have the ability to be their own discipline. So here we got Che back. I can share my screen again. Hi, Che. And so that's really, we want to provide consistent expectations and schedule. We want to be fully present, right? The truth is that when we are not fully present, we're not giving the gift of our full attention, and we can't do that all the time. But every day they need to have time with us where we're not, and it can be 5 minutes, right? It can be 10 minutes where they are not, where we're fully present with them. This is not about entertaining them. I want to be really, really clear that it is not our job to entertain our children. And it is a significant, we can see in school the children who've had an adult saying, now let's do this together. Now we're going to do this. It's going to be so fun. I'm going to keep you busy. I'm going to do, and that doesn't actually serve the child. The child needs to know how to be alone. The child needs to know how to spend time by themselves, to read, to write without electronics, right? We're not talking about being entertained. Their brain actually needs that. There's so much research out now that shows that if they don't have that time, the creative part of the brain can't turn on. But one of the things we have to be aware of is with our digital lives, right? We have our phone and we have our laptop, and we are always plugged into work, at least, and we really have to put it away and be present. Okay. So, and then I really like to bring the golden rule. How would I feel if I were having this emotion? When I really got that through hand in hand, that the way that I was parenting my children during their emotions was not a way I would want to be treated, that was it for me. Because I realized that my children deserve to be treated at least the way that I would want to be treated. And so it really started to change how I thought about my reactions to them. And the truth is that when I am when I am upset, I want somebody to listen to me. I don't want them to try to fix it. I want them to hear me. I want them to offer empathy. In fact, my husband is well trained on this now. Early on, he would come in and tell me how to fix it. It drove me crazy. So then I got an empathy buddy, and he's like, wait, why don't you tell me things? I'm like, because you try to fix it. Anyway, so now he's really good. He's like, that just stinks. Like, yeah, doesn't that stink? So sometimes they just need somebody to listen to them, and how would you want to be treated? And we have to really be aware that love can't be attached to our behavior, good or bad. Our children should not think that the only time we like them is when they're happy and following everything that we want them to do. They need to know that they are loved no matter what. Alfie Kahn, if you haven't read any of his work, he's great. He really talks about this quite a bit, that children very much get shaped by seeking approval because we dole out our love based on what they think, what we want, rather than actually loving them for who they are. So I want to give you these tools and we're going to go through them. One, I have a question for you all. I thought we had 2.5 hours. It turns out, I guess it's been published as from 9 to 11. I just wanted to see kind of, if you all don't mind putting in the chat where people are. If you have to bow out at 11, I'll go through this a lot faster. If we've got a little bit more time, then I'll take a little bit more time. But I want to respond to what works for you all, because I thought we had 2.5 hours together. Let's take the share so I can see. We've got some 11s. Okay, so I'll go through this. I can totally understand that. All right, so okay. So what can you do as a parent? And we've been talking about the connection comes first. So here are some strategies for redirection. We're going to go through each one of these, but I love that it actually, his strategies come out as redirect, which is helpful to remember. Okay. The first thing is we want to reduce words and say what we see. I see your shoes at the front door. I notice you haven't started your homework, right? Very, very clear and without the emotion and without kind of the make wrong built in. We use I notice a lot in our house, okay? So really being clear without in our house, my daughters have named it the wire cutters. When I say something and it could be ended, and then I keep going and I say, because you haven't done that all week or whatever it is. And especially Georgie's so good. She's like, wire cutters, Mom, you could have just left it at the first, because they named it. When I'm like, oh, you're right, I'm sorry. That's my critical self coming in. And, like we really try to play with that. So embrace their emotions. They're responsible. First of all, children are responsible for their own happiness, as are you. Our happiness, it's not our job to make our children happy. It's our job to connect with them and to love them. It is not our job to entertain them. It is not our job to be their playmate. Yes, have fun with your child. Yes, but I want to be clear about that. And we need to give children the opportunity to have big emotions and have it be safe, instead of us trying to close them down, right? We say, because part of what we do culturally is we tend to have our children have to, what are the things that we say? Actually, if you want to throw these in the chat, what are the things that we say, or people say, not we, people say to children when they start to have a big emotion or any emotion? What are some of the things we say?
Please don't cry.
Please don't cry. Right. Perfect, Pedro. Why do we say please don't cry?
I think we're just being selfish, and it affects us emotionally that they cry. So we're just, it's a bit selfish, right? Like you're trying to make them stop because they hurt you.
That's right. And I remember being told that as a child. I remember that experience of having that closed down. And what I heard was, it's not okay to have emotions. And I will tell you, in my adult life, I have had to learn how to make emotions okay, because I learned early on that emotions were not all right. Right? That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. What are other things we say to children that may silence their emotions? You're okay. Yes. Oh my gosh. That one is, I had to teach my parents not to say that to my children, because oftentimes I'd fall down when I was little and it was like, you're okay. Get up. Why are you crying? Right? Like, toughen up. I remember, toughen up, Sheesley. When I was little, right? Toughen up. And for boys, it's even worse. Boys don't cry, be a man, don't be so dramatic, right? These are all the things we say when these emotions come up. Beautiful. And that does not serve our children, because what we're telling them is that first of all, it's, I only want you to be happy is the underlying communication. And it invalidates how they feel, which is one of the worst things that we can do for them. Right? How about the shh? What? If somebody shushes me, I have to tell you, what are you talking about? So I like to go back to the rule, it's a golden rule there. All right. And we have to be aware, well, we really just talked about this. One of the things I just want to highlight here are the results that children share their internal experiences less and less. That actually has a physical impact as well. When the emotions are stuffed, there's a physical response to that. It's not healthy. They learn to stuff their feelings, and they learn to hide vulnerability. And vulnerability is one of the keys to human connection, right? So that's another piece. All right. And then we want to help our children distinguish between their feelings and their actions, right? I understand you feel angry right now, but we can't hit each other. I will stay with you while you calm down, and then we can talk about ways to express your anger. Or it's okay to feel angry with your sister right now, but we don't yell at each other. Let's talk about other ways to express it. And that actually, Margaret, to your question earlier, right? Like, it's okay to feel angry. It's okay to feel upset, but it's not okay to say XYZ, right? And really distinguishing that behavior from the feeling, and making the feeling okay without making the behavior, you know, like having that distinction. So another redirection strategy is to describe and not preach. Okay. I notice you're throwing cards, makes it hard to play the game, right? You can read the rest of these. That avoids putting the child on the defensive, and it also puts it on the onus on the child to think through how to address the issue, which keeps the brain engaged. If you tell the child, don't throw the cards, period, you're shutting down their brain. But when you say, I notice you're throwing cards, that makes it hard to play, they actually have to process that and think about how they're going to respond to that, right? It also engages the child in the conversation rather than making them defensive, and really helps them think through things. Okay, you want to involve your child in the discipline, and it's called bidirectional dialogue. And this is Ross Greene's work, which we love, which is, I noticed, and this would be good for you, Dina, I noticed that the towels are on the floor. What's up with that, right? Which is different than whatever. And I'm not saying you ever don't do it perfectly, but at least the way that I would naturally respond, right? I noticed blank. Any ideas of how to solve that, right? So we're really bringing them into the conversation. We want to reframe the no into a conditional yes. Yes, we can have another story tomorrow night, right? Yes, I would love to play with you once we get the house picked up. Yes, I would love to go outside to throw the ball this weekend, right? Part of what's really interesting about the brain, and Dan Seigel has a book called The Yes Brain, is when we hear yes, it stimulates the brain into social engagement behavior rather than activating a reactive state, which can be fight, flight, or freeze. And it builds what he calls the perspective mind, which is the ability to imagine a future and create future actions to meet present needs, right? Which I think is so interesting. It's called the perspective mind. So you can actually see where you're going rather than just hearing the no. And it also builds delayed gratification. When we say no, the brain goes to that fight or flight. I'm not saying you never say no to your children. There are times where it's appropriate, but as much as we can say yes and build their future thinking, we want to do that. We want to emphasize the positive rather than you interrupted me. You can say, please let me finish. Thank you for getting the table set so quickly without being reminded, right? That helps. We want to creatively approach the situation. Be playful as appropriate. We want to remember the brain loves novelty. So as much as possible, when we have a chat, like playing, and this is hand-in-hand tool, bring play to the situation because it soothes the brain and it keeps the child engaged in finding solutions. All right, and then he says to also teach mindsight tools, right? So that's like I talked about with this morning, talking about how does the other person feel, and having the child start to get into the other person's world really makes a big difference for how they are able to move through the world, right? And so always trying to have them think about, I wonder how that landed for the other person. I wonder how they felt. What do you think they were thinking? And always bringing in, and that's what he calls mindsight tools. You're also going to ask them how they're feeling. That's a whole nother topic, but there are so many emotions and we tend to say sad, angry, hurt. There are very few that we use, and really human beings, that our emotions come because there's a need behind our emotions. If any of you have delved in at all to nonviolent communication, that's a beautiful framework for this conversation as well. Okay, so what of these things, if you don't mind throwing them into the chat, do you want to remember? What do you want to make sure that you're going to take away? I'm going to go to here. Margaret says, going back later and discussing solutions. Yeah, she said she gets tired and tends not to loop back. And it doesn't have to be that day either, Margaret. That's one thing to remember is, it can be, she's young, but she's not that young. She can remember yesterday, right? So, and a lot of times I find that's what's nice about the family meeting is it's at a time where everybody has some freshness.
Now we really need to implement that. Of course, she doesn't want to do a family meeting, but I'll bet if the allowance was given out during the family meeting, and didn't you also do a thing where you would plan something fun for the family? Like at the end of the meeting, you'd say, what fun thing are we going to do this week? That might be a hook.
And I will tell you, we've had them not come to family meetings, but each of them has probably opted for that once. It's easier when you have two children and one is coming.
Right.
But I will say that with the allowance piece makes a difference. And then them having jobs, I find helps, like that they get to be the facilitator or the recorder, and some people actually have a prop for the job, which for her age she would love, right? Like you get to be the facilitator and you get to wear a special whatever, a hat.
Okay. Yeah, we can do that. Plus we also, we haven't tried it much, but when we did, Che and I practiced having problems or concerns to solve with each other, not her, so that it didn't feel like we were just ganging up on her. She was very interested in those. So
well, one of our staff
need to keep doing it.
One of our staff members said he went home and mentioned it. He has they have three, but the oldest one, he told him what it was about. And the oldest one came to the meeting with a list of issues that he wanted to discuss. He'd never had a place to put them before, right? All of a sudden he's like, I want to talk about this and this and this and this and this. And they're like, okay, well, why don't we pick 2 for the week? We'll do 2 more next week, right? So Dominique says modeling behavior. Dina says use the redirect I see, I notice. Che says I like the allowance being timed to family meeting attendance. Yep. Start family meetings. Great. Great. And okay, here's just, I know we're going to wrap up here. I want to give you a few additional resources as well. Oh, I'm in the wrong screen. Okay, so there are 3 books that I really love. The Listen book in the center is really the book that is it's the hand-in-hand class. I think the hand-in-hand class is better, but for those of you who can't make that work, this is it's a very good book. The Self-Driven Child by William Stixrud is excellent for talking about building motivation in your children and how the brain works. He was one of the first people to really look at the child's brain and how everything works. And then the Yes Brain, I already talked about a little bit with Dan Seigel, I recommend. But if you only can read one book, I would read No Drama Discipline. That one is really, really excellent. And I think I'm going to stop my share. And anything else before we close today? We have about 5 minutes. I just want to thank you all for coming. I know that you have really busy lives and there's a lot going on. And I love that you're here spending time with us and really engaged in this conversation. I hope that this was valuable and worth the time that you put in. That's always my goal, is to make it as rich and as engaging as possible. If you would like to, I am totally open to feedback. If you have ways that you think I can make these presentations better, please do not hesitate to reach out. I love the feedback, and I really appreciate actually folks sharing with me. I think that's how we grow as individuals, is we're really better together. Your children are a gift to our world and to our school, and we're so grateful to be partnering with you on this journey we call Raising Our Children. And I hope everyone has a great weekend. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Tamara.
Thank you.